Hey friends, get your tickets to Pod Jam in Las Vegas, March 22nd and 23rd. Comedy, music, and podcast recordings with all of your friends from the stand-up community. Get your tickets now, March 22nd and 23rd. Details in today's show notes. Or just email me, standupwithpete@gmail.com. Stand up. Hello, and welcome to today's episode of Stand Up, where my very special guest is former federal prosecutor and big deal, apparently, Glenn Kirschner joining me. That conversation begins at 13 minutes in after the news, and you're going to love this one because I begged Glenn Kirschner to come on and talk about his new budding friendship with one of the greatest actors of our time, Robert De Niro, who several of us got to meet and hang out with on Saturday night. Great conversation. I know you're going to love that one. But first, as I start pretty much every show, Monday through Friday, I've got your headlines from yesterday. So let's get to it. Today's show and all shows are commercial free, brought to you by you. Patreon.com/Pete Dominic. For just $5 or more, you can always pay more. I can keep doing this show every day. Subscribe now. And here are your headlines for the 17th of January, 2024. The big news, of course, was what happened in Iowa on Tuesday, where Iowa voters, well, very few of them, really, in the grand scheme of things. There's not a lot of them to begin with, but about 50,000 of them voted for Donald Trump. Roughly 15% of the nearly 720,000 registered Republicans in Iowa voted this year, so a small fraction of participation. And while the Iowa caucuses have a terrible record of picking the Republican nominee, they picked the former and potential future authoritarian, the 4 times indicted, twice impeached Donald Trump. No surprise there, but the race really was for second place. That's Ron DeSantis. But it looks like Nikki Haley is looking like she might come in second and maybe even first in the tiny state of New Hampshire next week. As a result of the outcome of the vote, Vivek Ramaswamy and Asa Hutchinson have called it quits from their poor showings in Iowa. And the bottom line is Iowa really doesn't mean that much. Despite the history that Trump made, the results in solidly red Iowa don't offer meaningful clues for the 2024 election, according to pretty much all the political analysis out there. Little doubt that Trump has created a major political realignment within the Republican Party and disgraced a lot of people. And even crazier that those 50,000 people went out and risked their lives because it was that cold and dangerous out to vote for the guy. But what are you going to do? That's the Iowa Republican voter for you, the evangelical right-wing radicalized voter in Iowa has chosen Donald Trump. Meanwhile, yesterday we got news that President Biden raised nearly 3 times as much money as Donald Trump did in Q4. The energy and enthusiasm supporting President Biden seems to still be pretty high, and Donald Trump is spending a lot of money that he raised on his various and multitude of quite serious legal cases that he is having to defend himself for because he crimes so much, including yesterday where he was in court again to face charges of defamation again from the same person, E. Jean Carroll, who he already lost in a $5 million judgment to last year. Then he went out and went on a CNN town hall and defamed her again. So her brilliant lawyer, Robbie Kaplan, brought him right back into court. And guess what? She's going to win again because he's that stupid and apparently has that much money to burn. His decision, by the way, to appear in court is under no obligation, and it really just reflects his desire and, well, the effective campaign to use the legal threats against him to energize his supporters and raise more money. I guess he has more money when he shows up in court, gets raised. It's just a correlation that seems to happen every time. I talk more about it with Glenn Kirschner, but that is what is going on in Republican politics, the presidential campaign, and Trump legal world as of yesterday. In other news, the U.S. struck Houthi targets. It was the 3rd attack against the Iran-backed rebel group since a U.S.-led air and naval barrage that hit dozens of targets last week. Also, in Gaza, Qatar and Israel and Hamas have reached a deal to allow additional aid into Gaza in exchange for the delivery of medication to Israeli hostages. And Israel has been surprised, apparently, by the extent and quality of the tunnel network beneath Gaza. New York Times reporting they now believe there are far more tunnels than they once thought, between 350 and 450 miles of tunnel. Unbelievable. Say whatever you want about Hamas. They are pretty good at digging tunnels under the entire tiny strip of land that they have had control over. And in a related story, back in Capitol Hill, in a notable test, Senator Bernie Sanders forcing colleagues to vote on record whether to investigate human rights abuses in the Israeli-Hamas war, a step toward potentially limiting U.S. military aid to Israel as its devastating attacks on Gaza grind past 100 days. But seriously, I want to know more about those tunnels. I mean, who's doing a documentary or even the dramatic reading, fictionalized series of the Hamas tunnel diggers? Okay, sorry. In other news, top Democrats and Republicans in Congress yesterday announced a deal that they had reached a $78 billion compromise to partly extend a major pandemic expansion of the child tax credit, which is huge news. It cut child poverty rates nearly half in 2021. And now they're going to restore 3 popular expired business tax breaks. The deal will be financed by reining in the pandemic-era employee retention tax credit, whatever the hell that is. But this rare bipartisan agreement should be given a lot more attention because it spans both chambers. And while it still faces deep obstacles in Congress laboring to tackle the basic work of funding the government, some House Democrats have argued that the legislation should do more to expand the child tax credit, while several Senate Republicans voiced resistance. At the White House, President Joe Biden invited the top 4 congressional leaders to the White House today to discuss requests for national security funding, which includes aid for Ukraine and Israel, as well as part for border security. According to multiple sources, that's happening today at the White House. So we will see what happens with those developments. But a big deal with the child tax credit. We'll see what happens with that. 15 million kids from low-income families will be better off as a result of this plan, according to Senator Ron Wyden. That's the kind of news I like to read and mention to you, and that's the kind of news I want to dig more into. So maybe I'll get Senator Wyden or somebody else on to talk about it. All right, let's go to the Supreme Court, where yesterday the justices declined to decide whether schools can bar transgender students from using a bathroom that reflects their gender identity. They declined to hear this case, which means it leaves in place a lower court ruling that allowed transgender middle school boy in Indiana to use the boys' bathroom. This is a win for human rights, a win for trans rights, according to the Human Rights Campaign, who said on social media yesterday, this is a step in the right direction in our ongoing fight to protect LGBTQ youth from anti-equality extremism. So we'll see what happens with that, because you know that fight's not over. But also worth mentioning that oral arguments are set to be heard today in a potentially major case backed by billionaire Charles Koch, has ostensibly to do with fishing industry and the regulatory agencies that regulate overfishing. Well, guess what? The Koch brothers hate any kind of regulation, and I assume that this would mean that they can burn more chemicals and make more billions of dollars as a result of them winning, and they have had a lot of wins along these lines. I'll be talking with Eric Siegel about these cases and more, I'm sure. And by the way, just a quick departure from the news. Yesterday, Siegel got the most wonderful email from a longtime listener, and I just briefly want to read it, and I'll go right back to the news. I just have a couple more headlines. But this listener named Darren, wherever you are, Darren, thank you for this, said to Siegel in an email, "Dear Eric, I've been listening to you on Stand Up for years. I just listened to your most recent episode on Pete's podcast. As such, I just wanted to reach out as a fan and say how much I appreciate you and your integrity. I love your style and how you make complicated matters easy to understand. I've purchased your books as well as several others that you've mentioned on air. I've learned so much from you. So, from a fan, please know how much you mean to all of us. Keep up the good work." How about that, Darren? That is such a lovely message to Eric Siegel, the Legal Eagle, and I will reach out to him and get him on, but he forwarded that to me because I know it made him feel real good. See, you can make a real big difference in people's lives with a simple email or text or social media post, something like that. All right, let's get back quickly to a couple more stories. I just wanted to mention yesterday a judge blocked JetBlue's $3.8 billion proposal to buy Spirit Airlines when they found out that Spirit Airlines are just Greyhound buses that they put wings on. A judge blocked the merger between JetBlue, or the purchase of JetBlue to Spirit Airlines, agreeing with the Justice Department that the merger would hurt competition. What else can I tell you? The World Economic Forum annual meeting kicked off in Davos yesterday, and I still haven't been able to get a gig. Have not been invited to Davos yet. Goldman Sachs reported their earnings. Guess what? They made $2 billion in the fourth quarter last year. And health news, diabetes is feeling a rise in amputations in San Antonio, according to the New York Times. And finally, a good news story. This is a nature story that's good news. Hey, how about that? When we get those, I'll always read them. 4 new species of deep-sea octopuses have been discovered near Costa Rica. So I think that's good news. Whenever a species is not announced that it's extinct or endangered but has been discovered, I think that's good news. And that is your news for today, because here is the bad news. And I wasn't going to say this at the top because I didn't want to start on a frustrated or negative note. I lost the whole show yesterday. So it's not that bad news, folks. Nothing serious. But no, for me it was last night. It was existential after 4 hours of work on the news and the interview and everything. I lost it all. My computer crashed because stupid long story, but I fixed it and everything is fine now. But that's why I don't have any sound for you today. I had a whole bunch of clips. I just can't go back and redo them. I want to get this up by my secondary deadline of 6 a.m., if not at midnight. So those are your headlines. Now let's get to my conversation with Glenn Kirschner, which I put a light edit on just for sound. There was a couple little sound issues, blips and blurps over the internet and over talking of each other, etc. Can't go back and redo it. So you're going to have to deal with this lesser audio quality version of my interview, which I think is still pretty darn good. But I have a very high standard here. I cut out all kinds of misspeaking and volume disparities, and sometimes they get through for sure, but I always try to put at least a light edit. Today, no can do because of that technical issue. Sorry, it's not up to my regular standard, but it is still an awesome conversation with Glenn Kirschner, of course, former federal prosecutor. You've got to subscribe to his Justice Matters and get invited to some of these events that I often speak at. Well, I've spoken at all of them, including this recent one in New York City. On Saturday, you heard me talk about where I got to bring my daughter Ava to meet Robert De Niro and Lawrence O'Donnell and so many of our greatest legal analysts of our time in New York on Saturday night. And I asked Glenn to come on today and talk to me about how he met Robert De Niro. I mean, he keeps his stuff close to the vest. He's private and so on. But I urged him and encouraged him to talk a little bit about it without sharing too much. He did. He was a little squeamish about it because he didn't want to sound like an arrogant prick, but I don't think he does. Glenn is a great guy, and I thought you guys would be as interested in this as I was, and so I wanted to pull back the curtain a little bit for you and talk to you about how Glenn met. I think Glenn met Robert De Niro because there's this trend or this development, certainly started in the Obama era, but picked up tenfold in the Trump era, where artists and well-known influential people want to get involved. They want to do something. They want to feel purposeful and have their voice heard. And so when you can have access to experts on a wide range of issues, from healthcare to the environment to all of these legal predicaments and the future of democracy, talking to someone like Glenn Kirschner, if you're Robert De Niro, why not take a shot at it? De Niro has always been a socially minded activist and cares about these issues. So I asked Glenn to come on and talk about it. And he did. We had a great conversation about that and some of the other legal issues that are unfolding right now. Again, follow Glenn Kirschner, listen to his podcast, subscribe to his YouTube channel where you can learn more about all of it. Let's do it right now. Time for Glenn Kirschner and the Kirschner Report. Yeah, there he is, and I'm very excited to see him. It's just been a few days since we had this very special opportunity to hang out with Glenn Kirschner and a whole bunch of other big name people who have already told you there. Glenn, thank you so much for inviting me. And I want to talk about how you got to meet and become friends with Robert De Niro.
Yeah, well, first of all, I'm thrilled that you were there. I'm thrilled that you closed out the night, as you do at all of our Team Justice gatherings in D.C. and now up in New York. And I will, unfortunately, be a little bit honest and heartfelt here for a minute, Pete. You kill every time, and I can't tell you how much I appreciate you being there to kind of leave us all laughing at the end. I'm dead serious about that. I'll make fun of you a little bit later.
For sure,
So,
but this time, just to be clear, I've done this with you, with your events and your subscribers. This is the fourth time, but this time my daughter came with me and she got to meet you and a whole bunch of other people, obviously De Niro, and had a great conversation with Lawrence O'Donnell about screenwriting, and he couldn't have been more kind and generous. Say something about that guy.
Yeah, no, Lawrence is the real deal. I call him Mr. 10 o'clock. I've been appearing with him for going on 6 years now. And the story that I asked him if it was okay to tell this. I don't want to, disclose anything behind the scenes that the anchors don't want disclosed. But one of the reasons I love him so much and I so enjoy and appreciate being on with him is because every time when we're on a commercial break right before my segment, he says the same thing to me. I'm sure he says it to other guests as well. He says, Glenn, I'm going to ask you a question, and then I want you to answer any other question that you think is better, because you're the one who knows, as a legal analyst, what the audience should know about this issue. Now, of course, Lawrence would always go on to ask exactly the right question. But the fact that a host is so gracious and so confident and sort of gives the guest permission to say what the guest thinks is important, I love that about him, and everything else, his clear, fierce voice, of standing for democracy and standing against Donald Trump. Lawrence is the real deal.
So one of the reasons he likes you and I like you and a whole bunch of other people like you and a whole bunch of other people that are in your world, legal experts, and many of them were there the other night. Tim Heafy I got to meet, and Maya Wiley was there, and Andrew Weissman and Mimi Roca were all there. But because you are all credible experts, you have years and years of experience in your case as a prosecutor. And so there's a whole bunch of artists and celebrities just like the rest of us that want to get the opportunity to ask you questions so we can understand what the hell is going on with our country and with the former disgraced president. And I guess it just so happens that Robert De Niro is one of those people. He's obviously always been a social justice warrior in many different cases and ways and issues. And you talked about 9/11 and his role there and what that meant to you. But what happened? He just reached out to you and wanted to meet you and talk to you?
Yeah, he did. And before I turn to that, we also had the phenomenal Ellie Mistal there. We had Danielle Moody there. We had Katie Fang there. We had, I don't want to forget, Jonathan Capehart there. We had little Steven Van Zandt, Miami Steve, Donald, Bruce Springsteen's foil and rock and roll consigliere. And let me give a shout out to anybody who doesn't know about what Steven Van Zandt has done besides be the lead guitarist for Bruce Springsteen forever and have his own band called the Disciples of Soul. Please look at his solo catalog. He is the man who created Artists United Against Apartheid. He said he was over there on a journalistic / musical mission in Pretoria, the stories he tells. And he says, man, I may not be able to do much, but I can do something. And he put together that boycott of the world's top musicians from playing South Africa. He is my musical hero. So many of the people who were there, Pete, it's just, mind blowing that they were willing and interested to come to our little Team Justice happy hour in New York City. It didn't hurt that Bob De Niro gave us his back private room at the La Conda Verde restaurant, which is pretty dang special. All right, I'll tell the story. I've never told this on air, and I have to tell you I'm reluctant to tell it, Pete, but because it doesn't sound real.
I know, but I also asked you here to tell it and asked you if you would. So go ahead.
I know. But let me pretend to be humble for a minute. It doesn't sound real. I'm a gutter kid from Jersey, for real, and did I ever think I would meet Bob De Niro? No, I never thought I would meet Robert De Niro. So a few years ago, Bob De Niro was, let me fix my phone because I'm an expert on all things IT. It's making funny noises. I can't even spell IT. Okay, back to the story. So Bob De Niro was going to be on with Joy Reid, whom I love and I, have been with many, many, many times. And I was supposed to be on the same hour, but I was remote down in D.C. and De Niro was going to be on set at 30 Rock with Joy. I wouldn't believe this story if Joy Reid didn't tell me it. Bob De Niro comes in. Joy says, she'd never met him before. She was thrilled to meet him. And one of the first things out of his mouth, according to Joy, was, "Is Glenn Kirschner here? I'd like to meet him." And it turned out, no, I was on the show that night, but I was remote down in DC. But then I got like his people's information and all. And we started communicating, not Mr. De Niro and I, but his people. And they said, listen, when you're up in New York, Bob would love to have coffee or whatever. So years went by, Pete. And when I would come up to New York, I would send my email and I would say, hey, no, Mr. De Niro is in Europe for a month. And so this time on a lark, because I decided it was time to have a Team Justice New York City happy hour. We actually have them all around the country. This coming Friday, we're having one somewhere else. I'm sorry. Let me just leave it at somewhere else. So on a lark, I email Mr. De Niro's people again. Hey, I'm going to be up there. Within about 5 or 10 minutes, I get a phone call. Please hold for Bob. And Bob De Niro gets on the phone. And we proceed to talk about mainly the legal issues of the day in which he is intensely interested. And you have heard him. You have seen him. He is a fierce, forceful voice for decency and democracy and accountability, and speaks out against Donald Trump as vocally and directly as anybody. And, he's gotten some blowback and he has burned some capital in the process, but he doesn't care because he said there's right and there's wrong, and we all need to stand with what's right. So he's really interested in the legal issues of the day. So, we're talking about all of that. And I said, listen, he won't let you call him Mr. De Niro. Everybody must call him Bob. And let me stop here, Pete, because I ended up spending time over the course of 3 days with Bob De Niro. And he is as gracious and generous and humble and caring and kind a man you're ever going to meet. Certainly you're ever going to meet in the industry. Not that I've met anybody in the industry. I don't consider you, part of. So I said, look, Bob, we're going to have this little happy hour. I'm looking for a venue, and, I would love, obviously, for you to come. But if not, I certainly understand. Maybe we could have coffee, which we've been trying to do for a long time. So a couple of days later, I'm now on vacation over the Christmas holiday with my wife, Nilu, who you like a little too much as far as I'm concerned. And can I just say the funniest thing that I think the thing that made me laugh loudest that night was when at the end of the night, the crowd had thinned out. You had your hat and your coat on. You walk over to my wife, you give her a big hug, and you say, "I'll see you at home, honey."
Sorry about that. I didn't know you were there.
Funniest line of the night, frankly. So I get another call. I'm on vacation. Please hold for Bob. And he said he'd like us to have our happy hour, in his back room at La Conda Verde. He said he'd like to attend. One thing leads to another. And I'm now up in New York, and he is spending not one-on-one, but 3-on-1. Myself, my wife, and our son was with us, sitting in the hotel, the Greenwich Hotel, which is just a beautiful, beautiful, intimate, unique hotel. And, we're spending an hour and a half, just the four of us, chatting about all things Trump. And, my wife grew up in Iran, had to flee after the revolution of 1979. And Bob was just intensely interested in all of that. I mean, he's giving us warm hugs before and after. He is, like nothing you would ever expect, because you only know him through his roles. And he is none of those characters. He is this lovely, genuine, humble, engaging person.
What does he tell you? Does he ask you, how can I help? How can I be of service here? He's one of the most famous artists, actors of our entire time of our life in the world. And so if he puts the light on something, it gets attention. If he speaks out, it matters. Does he ask you, what can I do, being who I am? Or is he just mostly interested in the legal issues and arguments and what he thinks, wants to know what you think.
Yeah, I think he's interested in all of it. I mean, I know he has definitely entered the fray. And, I think he's interested in hearing feedback about whether his voice really matters. My opinion is his voice can probably penetrate certain demographics that my voice and your voice will never penetrate because of who he is. I mean, to say he's an icon and an acting legend and we all know and can quote lines from any number of his movies. I mean, he has impacted our lives in a very real way. The arts, I mean, are far more important than a lot of people give them credit for. So my humble opinion was, please keep doing what you're doing. Do more of it if you're interested in doing more of it, because every voice matters in this fight. Your voice, I think, matters in ways that other voices don't. And then, I mean, the next day, the next morning we wake up, please hold for Bob. Hey, would you like to come out and spend the day at the shoot over in Brooklyn and meet the crew and watch us film? No, I'm a little busy. I'm like, of course I want to come to the shoot. So, I mean, the whole weekend, Pete, was surreal. It was soul filling. Just yeah.
Like, you watch him shoot a scene on a film?
Yeah.
And then he walks off and goes, Glenn, come back to my trailer with me and we'll hang out. And like, he just goes and does the lines and then spends time with you.
Yeah. And I'll say his trailer is remarkable, but what's more remarkable is the warm, incredibly generous human being he is. I wouldn't say that if it wasn't true. And if it was some other movie star and we had an okay encounter, I would not gush and I would not make stuff up. I'm still processing those 3 days. I really am.
Did you ever, or your wife or son, like get into asking him about him, his career, his life, anything like that? Did those things come up, or was he mostly in control of it all?
I don't want to go chapter and verse about our conversations, but we kind of talked about everything, and he was just as interested in us as we were in him, which tells you something about someone of his accomplishment and stature.
Well, it was such a cool event, and it was just, like we said, so many other names that were there, and so these people have gotten to know you and want to get to know you, and then you've got all these, people who support your work too that showed up. I mean, to many of them, you're there, De Niro. All right, maybe not, but those people look up to you and your voice and the work that you're doing, as do I, of course, and always so happy that we're friends and to support your work. And I want to just get to a couple of questions real quick, but anything else about?
Forget that American hero Aquilino Gonell, who defended everybody at the Capitol that day, was also with us and spoke movingly. And there is an amazing group hug picture. The three bald guys, you, me, and Aquilino, that I posted, and I think you posted. And, how many special moments there were that night? You can't.
Yeah. I can't, you know what? You're so right. I can't move on to these legal issues because I'm still there. I mean, bringing my daughter, who's, a budding writer, director, actor and meeting De Niro and talking with O'Donnell and being in that room and her, seeing me too, perform in front of those people. She's like, Dad, are you nervous to perform in front of De Niro? I'm like, I am, but he or anybody else is not allowed to see that. I have to go in there and be the most confident person and then explain the art of the performance to her, and her seeing that and seeing all those people react to it. It was like such a special night that you gave me with my daughter that I'll never forget. And nobody that was there will ever forget. And clearly a special 3 days for you, your wife, and your son. What are your friends and family saying? What do they say to you about just the fact that you're now pals with De Niro? What have you heard since that night?
My family is not all that impressed with me, which I guess is as it should be. And, I've talked to a few friends, but not that many at this point. But it really was nice meeting your daughter, too. She is beautiful. I'm sure very talented. I know she's studying to sort of be in the film business, perhaps.
Yeah. She wants to act, direct, and write. And she already has. She's written, she had a film in like the high school film festival. Her dream is to be in like Tribeca Film Festival or something like that. So there you go. You get a picture with De Niro, and she's on her way. She's going back to college in a few days. And so like that was our big event that you hosted, probably the biggest highlight of the time I had with her while she was home. And we did some fun stuff, but that was just so much.
I'm really glad.
All right. So let's just find out this whole E. Jean Carroll case. This is crazy that he was successfully sued. She won for defamation. And it was proven in a civil trial that there's just different terminology about it, rape or sexually assault or whatever. I'm hearing different things. People are saying, oh, it's only a civil trial, doesn't matter as much. So maybe unpack that. But more importantly, they're back in court. What? Yeah. She's back. It's the same thing. And she's got this amazing lawyer and they're going to probably win again. What's going on? I feel like we already saw this one.
Well, he'll never stop defaming her. You know, he defamed her once. He got banged out by the jury for it. He defamed her again. Technically, this is actually the first case because they had to litigate whether he had any level of immunity from this civil suit because he defamed her the first time when he was president, the second time after he'd left office. So he had no claim to any immunity. Yes, it's crazy. What's crazy is he refuses to learn his lesson. Nobody can accuse him of learning from his mistakes. But here's what is the most remarkable thing about this whole trial number 2, Pete. I just finished a Justice Matters video on it. I'm editing it now. It'll go up in an hour. I hope people will watch it because I want to read just a little bit of what Judge Kaplan had to do to protect this jury against Donald Trump. No identifying information about the jurors will be made public, nor will it be shared with the court or the parties. That means the attorneys. Judge Kaplan told the jurors. The jurors will also be transported to and from the courthouse from gathering points, in other words, undisclosed locations. The added measures are meant to protect the jury from any unwanted attention, harassment, or invasion of privacy. Pete, I tried more than 100 cases, well over 100 cases in my 30 years. In only 2 cases did I have to have an anonymous jury with extraordinary security measures put in place by the court to protect the jury. It was in 2 RICO trials that I did against the most dangerous criminal organization ever to be prosecuted in the courts of Washington, D.C. The criminal gang, the criminal enterprise killed 30 people. They killed rivals, they killed enemies, they killed witnesses, and they killed their own members if they tried to leave the organization. Yeah. Pete, in those 2 RICO trials, not only did we have anonymous jurors, nobody was allowed to know their name. The United States Marshals brought them to court every day, and one of the trials lasted 6 months. Every day from an undisclosed location, took them back to that undisclosed location at the end of every trial day. We were in the secure courtroom, which had bulletproof glass separating the audience from the well of the court where we were and the defendants and the defense attorney and the jurors and the judge and his staff were. And the defendants were ordered by the judge to wear stun belts under their suits so they couldn't act up and act out and get dangerous in court. One of them did act out anyway in court. And guess what, Pete? They still got to 2 of the jurors during the course of our 6-month trial. The jurors weren't hurt, but they were approached, they were threatened, they were intimidated, and those 2 jurors had to be removed, and alternate jurors who were in the trial from jump had to replace those jurors. That is the only other case where I saw these extraordinary security measures put in place. And this and we have to do this again for Donald Trump and those he would inspire to violence. This is flippin' insane. It's insane. And the system should have risen up and taken care of this man long ago and not let it come to this.
That is a crazy story. And I probably should mention I'm wearing a stun belt myself right now, but that's just for
a whole different reason. Yeah,
for a different reason. It's always on. Man, I just can't believe that they're retrying this case. This is for comments that he made during the CNN town hall when he defamed her again. It's tough to prove defamation, and she already did it. The lawyer, Robbie Kaplan, the judge's name is also Kaplan, right? For E. Jean Carroll. And now he ordered to pay him $5 million, and now she's going to probably win again, right? I mean, and just another trial.
There's no doubt she's going to win again. And here, I love this. This tells you something about who Donald Trump is and what Donald Trump is. During jury selection, the judge asked the prospective jurors, all of the jurors who might become regular jurors, the following question. Whole courtroom full of jurors, whole jury box full of jurors as they're going through jury selection. Judge Kaplan asks, this is a quote, if any of the potential jurors would have a problem accepting the ruling that Trump did sexually assault Miss Carroll and that Trump's statements about her were defamatory. Not a single juror raised their hand and said, I can't accept that. That's shocking. How could that be? No, they're all like, that sounds about right. I can accept that. I'm taking liberties, obviously, but not a single juror said, I can't accept that. I can't believe that. That makes no sense to me. This is who Donald Trump is.
I got to ask you just real quick. I just saw this news that Trump aide Peter Navarro has lost his bid for a new trial. He's going to be facing sentencing. And this is for his criminal contempt of Congress conviction because he didn't show up for it.
He refused to testify. He refused to comply with a lawfully issued congressional subpoena. Why? Because he wanted to keep hidden the damaging evidence he had and could offer against Donald Trump.
And so he's going to jail now.
Yeah, finally.
Right? I'm so happy.
I think he's facing 6 months. 4 months mandatory. I would have to go back and look. He's going to go in for a number of months.
I guess I just don't understand, and this is the question, how during the January 6th committee investigation, they subpoenaed people like Jim Jordan and other congressmen about what they knew, and they never showed up. And now those guys have the power. They're Republicans in majority in the House. So they subpoenaed Hunter Biden. He did show up. And I wanted you to just connect those two dots. I know you saw that last week, and I wanted to, how come those Republican congressmen still haven't had to comply with their subpoena? Your friend Eric Swalwell likes to remind us every opportunity they get, but I just don't really get how they have gotten away with that. And now that they're in charge and they're, putting out these subpoenas for Hunter, and the difference is he showed up and they still didn't want.
We're letting the criminals act as cops. It doesn't it makes no sense to me, Pete, because not only Jim Jordan, but Mark Meadows and Dan Scavino and a handful of others, they committed the crime of contempt of Congress by refusing to comply with lawfully issued congressional subpoenas. And now Jim Jordan is issuing the very same subpoenas that he violated, which is beyond farce. I mean, Saturday Night Live would reject this as a skit, right? Right. Now, Hunter Biden technically, I believe, did not comply with the subpoena that was issued. He wanted to set different terms for his own testimony. He said, I'll testify, but I'm not doing it behind closed doors so you can lie about and spin what I say. I'll do it publicly. The reality is the witness doesn't get to set the terms of any subpoena that is issued by Congress. That is a very different thing from saying the Department of Justice will decide to charge, to indict, and to prosecute Hunter Biden for contempt of Congress for defying the subpoena. They may not. What we know is that nobody ever charged Jim Jordan for the crime he committed. Nobody ever charged Mark Meadows or Dan Scavino for the crimes they committed. We could spend a long time talking about why that might be. But what you do when you decline to hold people accountable for these obvious crimes, you're just encouraging more of this behavior in the future. And at some point, Pete, maybe we'll get back to enforcing the rule of law without fear or favor.
I hope you're right. Justice matters. Well, I don't know if you got anything else about Jack Smith, but I did see today the DC Court of Appeals rejected an appeal from Twitter, formerly Twitter, X, the company, that asked the court to rehear the matter of a search warrant that was granted to special counsel Jack Smith so he could access Trump's Twitter feed as part of the federal election interference case. But I think that was a pretty big development. I don't know if you followed that today.
Yeah, I saw that. That is expected. And I know there were some people, some of the judges who issued a statement. It's not technically a dissenting opinion. I don't want to drill down on all the legalities and the details. But some of the people criticize Jack Smith for not being, attentive enough to a possible executive privilege claim. And I have to read it all for myself before I mock it. If it's mock worthy, I don't know if it's mock worthy, but all I know is you're exactly right. They rejected the notion that somehow Jack Smith should not have been able to use the legal process to get a hold of Donald Trump's Twitter feed.
That should be your new podcast. If it's mock worthy with Glenn Kirschner, I'll do it. That's my job. Glenn, I appreciate you so much for joining me tonight, for inviting me to the event, and just for our friendship. It will sustain forever, I know, and I am so grateful to you and for you.
Thanks, Pete. And I'm sorry I introduced you to the crowd as Mini-Me. That was wrong.
No, oh, right. There he goes. Glenn Kirschner. I'll give him the last word because that was very funny, and I so appreciated him joining me as always. Go let him know on social media that you heard him. Go subscribe to his Patreon, which I helped him get off the ground. Why he always gives me so much credit. And go listen to his podcast and subscribe to his YouTube channel. So great. Loved that conversation. Sorry again if the audio wasn't up to my regular standard, but I'm back at it for you tomorrow. I've got David Rothkopf joining me. I've also got a China expert, Dexter Roberts, back on the show, which I'm excited to share with you. And what else? Who else should I have on? What should I be talking about? What are the issues, stories that matter to you, your family, your community, our planet? Because that is the standard here on Stand Up. All right, lots of news coming for you from what I'm going to be creating this year. Very excited to announce soon a Substack, more personal in nature, conversations with people about their daily and lifelong struggles and more. Also, we're going to be having a marketplace where listeners, subscribers will be able to meet, connect, and sell their goods, their wares, their crafts, their services. That'll be announced pretty soon. And of course, Las Vegas, March 22nd, 23rd. Get your tickets now. There's more information in today's show notes, or you can email me at standupwithpete@gmail.com. That's all. That's all I've got for you, my bumblebees. I am so grateful and appreciative that you are still here after all these years, and I hope that you will stay. John Carroll taking us out as he does every day.
Even if it ain't a very friendly audience, well, they'll begin to listen when you start making sense and you stand up. Stand up. No need to point your rifle to defend your town. Just stand up. Stand up. You know they can't deny you what you're laying down. Boy, you better stand up. Stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. She's the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up. Stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up. They had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for loss, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change would begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. Alright, we got to speak up, we got to reach up, and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand up. Stand up. Got to stand up. Ooh, come on, just stand up. Everybody got to stand up in the darkest hour. Stand up. People got the power. Stand up. Come on, come on, come on, come on.